Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Friday Fellowship with Claremont Christian Fellowship. So good to be here with you watching live or any of you watching recorded later. We are having some just stunning spring weather here in Claremont, and it's making me very excited for the transitions we're going through right now with vaccinations coming into the country and hopefully an end in sight to this pandemic and all the ways we've been living under the restrictions. I'm especially looking forward to seeing many of you back on campus in the fall. So it won't be too long before we can be together again, and we're really excited about that. I'm very excited tonight because Lorraine will be speaking for us, something that happens far too rarely, and it's a great message. So we're looking forward to that. In a moment, we're going to take a moment to just make ourselves present to God and center ourselves for this time. And so I invite you to do that together with me now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday Fellowship. My name is Camille. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a junior at Scripps. I'm super excited to be your MC tonight. This week, I've been reflecting on how quickly this semester has been going. I can't believe we just have over a month left. I hope we all can find the energy and access the resources needed to finish strong. I was also really happy to hear that all adults in America will soon be eligible for COVID vaccines. I'm hopeful that we'll continue to see more progress each day. Before we get to the talk for tonight, we have a few announcements. We will be having a Zoom hangout after this evening's fellowship, and we're going to be playing some games. I really encourage you all to join. This is a great opportunity to meet some new faces and to get to know others in the CCF community. On Saturday, Matt will be hosting his weekly workouts. This will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time on Zoom. This will be an awesome chance to be with community and get moving and your heart racing at the end of the week, when if you're like me, you've probably been doing a lot of sitting during our classes. All are welcome. Next week, we'll be continuing with our spiritual practice series. Peter Choi will be speaking on rest as subversive resistance in a troubled world. Just from the title, this talk already sounds really interesting, and I know I can always use a reminder to incorporate more rest into my life. And now I'm super excited to introduce Lorraine and hear all the wisdom and insights she has to share on therapy as a sacred act.
Hello, my name is Lorraine Harry, and I am one of the staff for CCF. This week, we are beginning our last talk series of the year called Spiritual Practices. First of all, how wild is it to think that our time online is drawing to an end? Fingers crossed, when we start our next talk series in the fall, we will be together in person. In this series on spiritual practices, we are going to explore some different ways of growing spiritually. Growing spiritually to me means both drawing closer to God and also to other people. Jesus says the greatest commandment is to love God and to love our neighbor. And I'm excited to talk about some of those practices together in the next few weeks. Tonight, I want to talk about therapy in particular as a sacred activity. By therapy, I'm referring to psychotherapy, the act of meeting with a therapist or a psychologist or counselor. I want to talk about therapy as a means of growing closer to God and to others, and how God can use therapy in our lives. One of my goals for tonight is to help destigmatize therapy. Aside from the general stigma that still exists in our society toward therapy, I think for Christians, there can be another layer of stigma. As a Christian, one might think, shouldn't God be enough? Shouldn't my faith be enough to help me? If I see a therapist, does it mean I'm not a strong Christian? Maybe I just need to pray more or read the Bible more. Shouldn't Christian community be enough to help me? Have you ever thought any of those things? Even if I might not think those thoughts explicitly, I think there's a small part of my subconscious that's been socialized to believe those myths. But in my rational mind, I know that believing these things would be akin to saying, when I have a broken arm, for example, God will heal me. I don't need to see a doctor. Let's just pray for my arm to heal. And there are sects like that, like Christian Scientists, that don't believe in medical care. But I'm going to assume that most of us here rely on medicine and science, even if we also pray. In the same way that it's not less faithful to see a doctor, it is not less Christian to see a therapist. Just like we might get sick in our bodies, our brains can also have illnesses. And just like we need to care for our physical bodies, we need to care for our minds also. Even if we don't have a mental illness per se, probably none of us is exactly where we want to be in terms of how we think, feel, or relate to others. None of us has arrived, so to speak. And so really we can all benefit from therapy, I believe. We see in the Gospels that Jesus is a healer. He heals people not only physically, but emotionally, spiritually, socially. He is a holistic healer, and healing is at the heart of what he is about. God heals us through doctors, and God brings healing through mental health professionals. When we seek mental health help, we are seeking the wholeness that God has for us. I want to look at a story in the Gospels that illustrates the healing nature of Jesus, and to connect that story to how therapy can be an agent of healing in our lives. This story comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5. It begins, "A large crowd followed and pressed around him," Jesus, "and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse." Let's talk about this woman and her situation. The word that comes to mind when I think of her situation is desperation. She has lived with this condition for 12 years. Not only has she been physically unwell, her condition has also made her ceremonially unclean and a social outcast. Anything she touched would be considered unclean. She could not participate in any religious services or go to the temple because she was, quote unquote, unclean. Think about the toll this would take on you emotionally and mentally and spiritually. We also find out that she hasn't gotten better, even after seeing many different doctors. In fact, she's gotten worse. She has spent all the money she has on these doctor's appointments and now has nothing left. What an indictment here of a system that has left this woman destitute and outcast. What shame she must feel. What desperation. Life can be hard. It can knock us down. We can experience physical suffering, financial hardship, social challenges, spiritual struggles. The world is harsh, and we all suffer the consequences of it in different ways, whether it be from systemic forces such as racism, sexism, homophobia, or socioeconomic inequality, or mental or physical illness, or difficult relationships with family members. There are so many ways we can be hurt. The story continues. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. When this woman finds out that Jesus is coming through town, she decides to look to him for healing. She has faith that she will get better, but she has to do it covertly because she is unclean. She shouldn't be in the crowd or touching anyone. So she makes her way through the crowd to Jesus and touches just his outer clothing. What I see to be true in this story, and for us, is that healing takes initiative and it takes faith. To get better, we have to take that first step to say, I'm not well, but I want to get better. and I believe there is more for me. For myself, I first started seeing a therapist when I was 25. I had known for a while that there were many things that I wanted to work on. But 3 years out of college, I finally felt the capacity and the stability to pursue that healing. I wanted to get in a healthier place before I thought about getting married. I wanted to examine my childhood and the hard things I experienced and how they affected me presently. Additionally, when I was 17, my older brother died in a car accident, and it was something I hadn't had a chance to work through since I was only in high school when it happened. But now that I was 25 and in a more stable place, I was ready to do the hard work of working through my past. I ended up seeing my therapist, Carol, for about 2 years. It was emotionally difficult to dig into things I had never talked about before or even reflected on very much. I had an image near the beginning of my time of therapy that I was like a tree that was being uprooted, that there was going to be some serious work being done and also serious transformation. And the hard work definitely paid off. I gained clarity on upbringing and my family have shaped me, and I was healing and thinking about my brother's death. Like the woman in the story, pursuing healing takes work. It takes stepping out, taking a risk, wanting to get better, and believing that healing and greater wholeness are possible. What about you? Where would you like to see greater wholeness in your life? The story continues. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. After the woman touches Jesus' clothing, she is healed. She would have been happy to be on her way and to have been physically healed. But Jesus is intent on finding the person who touched him. Even the disciples are like, "Let it go, Jesus." It's kind of a strange episode since we've never seen someone get secretly healed by Jesus before. But Jesus doesn't want it to end there. He wants to relate to the woman. The woman finally comes forward and proceeds to share her whole story with Jesus. She tells him the whole truth, the text says. I'm imagining this includes the story of when she first started bleeding, the arduous process of the next 12 years of seeing different doctors but not getting better, how she spent all her money and didn't get better. Jesus takes the time to listen to her story, to see her, to know her. In therapy, we tell our story. We share the things that have been hidden. We allow ourselves to be known. This is sacred work. Often when people start therapy, there can be a lot of shame or feelings of, I'm not good enough or I'm not lovable. In therapy, we share who we are and are accepted for who we are. We are seen and respected. In CCF, we often bring up the acronym CAVU, known, accepted, valued, and understood. This is what Jesus did for the women, what we can do for each other and ourselves, and what can happen in therapy. The power of being accepted for who we are in the midst of our pain and brokenness and shame cannot be overstated. We experience healing when this happens, and this is deeply spiritual. Therapy is a place that this can happen in a serious, focused, and intentional way. In therapy, the person listening to us is purely focused on us. They're not bringing in their own needs, wants, and hurts. They're objective, but also affirming and non-judgmental. Unlike friendships, which are two-way relationships, therapy is all about us as the client. And we don't have to feel bad about that because that's what the therapist is getting paid to do. Therapy is about building a trusting relationship with our therapist. And God works through relationships. God shows God's self through other people, through their love and acceptance and guidance. The last verse of our passage says, "He said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering.'" Whereas the woman wanted to be healed secretly, Jesus listens to her story and calls her daughter. He knew that she needed more than just physical healing. He wanted her to be seen and known. He wanted her to know that it wasn't his magic cloak that healed her, but her own faith. He wanted her to feel empowered. In therapy, we gain new ways of thinking, of seeing ourselves and the world. A few years ago at Friday Fellowship, Pomona alumna Connie Whitwood gave a talk about distorted ways of thinking. I think we all walked away like, wow, that was really helpful to name all the ways we think in distorted ways. And other people think that way too, not just me. In therapy, we can discover ways our minds have convinced us of things that aren't true. Examples include black or white thinking, jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, and shoulds, just to name a few. Since January of this year, I've been seeing a therapist again. Since I've had more time during the pandemic, I wanted to take advantage of that time to get healthier, especially before the pandemic ends. I want to be in a healthier place before the fall starts and we jump back into our work in person. In particular, I want to work through the anxiety I feel around my work. One harmful way of thinking I've been able to identify is that I've been controlled and influenced by an imaginary critic. In my mind, there is someone or a group of people who's criticizing our ministry and kind of waiting for it to fail. This critic is very focused on numbers and things continuing in the same way as they have in the past. Through realizing that this critic is not a real person and that it doesn't matter what this critic thinks, I've been able to find more freedom to lead our ministry in a way that makes the most sense for current times, to not worry about what other people think. Not that I've totally mastered this, but at least I've been able to identify it. I feel myself getting healthier and reacting to certain situations better. I am of the belief that everyone benefits from seeing a therapist and that God changes lives through therapy. That's not to say everyone needs to go and see a therapist right now. Maybe you don't feel ready to do the work, or maybe you have other things holding you back, and that's okay. But I do want to share reasons why you might want to see a therapist. This list is not exhaustive, but is a start. If you're having any relationships in your life that are difficult with family members or friends or romantic partners, for example, if you're experiencing grief, if you're experiencing depression, if you have anger or resentment that you can't move past, if you're having panic attacks, if you're experiencing anxiety, if you're having trouble with sleep, if you've experienced trauma, if you're having thoughts about harming yourself, if you're going through a big change in life, if you find yourself turning to alcohol or drugs to cope, if you have an eating disorder, or if you just need someone to talk to, that's a very good reason to see a therapist. Sometimes we just need someone to listen to us. We need a space to talk about ourselves. Right now, we're going to hear from a few alumni and a student about their experiences with therapy and how God has used therapy in their lives. My hope as we listen to their stories is that we can not only normalize therapy, but embrace it.
So in my experience of having gone to both fellowship and therapy almost every week throughout college, I can honestly say that therapy has been a life changer, and for me personally, just crucial in gaining the awareness that I needed to really kind of understand where I was in my life in terms of healing from past hurts and trauma and identifying what makes me me, and the things that I really find meaningful and beautiful and want to continue doing. You see, I had been taught in a Christian and Korean family growing up that you put everybody else before you. And it wasn't until like my junior and senior year that I actually learned in practice what, you know, taking care of myself means and why that's really, really important. So I guess the first real big thing that I learned in therapy is that even from a place of good intention, I can do myself and other people harm. And so what do I actually need to do for me at the same time that I'm doing, as much as I want to and can do for other people? The other big thing that I've learned only through God and therapy is that I want to stay. So I've moved 25 times sort of all over the world in 24 years of life, and I know at this point that my tendency to procrastinate or to mentally and or physically like run as fast and far as I can from something that is on my mind, that doesn't help me. And I think again only through repeated learning and practice of new points of awareness have I reached a place where for the first time in my life I want to stay somewhere for a long time. And I would love to talk about my experience with therapy with any of you at any point where I'm capable.
Hey guys, my name's Erin. I am an alumna from Scripps class of 2020, and I'm super stoked to talk to you a little bit about my journey with therapy as a spiritual practice. So I started going to therapy in the spring of 2018. I was a sophomore in college and going through a mental health crisis. I was at the end of my rope. I had exhausted all of my other options. And so I was like, okay, like if I don't change something, I am not going to be able to finish college. I'm going to have to go home. So I'm going to try therapy, like last ditch effort. And I really went into it with this defeatist attitude of, like, I can't fix this for myself. I'm such a failure. Like this is something that I need to do, even though I knew internally that, that was the stigma talking, and that like taking care of yourself is totally valid, and we should all accept help when we need it. But it was only once I got into therapy that I realized what a blessing it was, and that you don't have to approach it the way I did, of coming into it only when you feel like you have no other choice. So I kind of want to talk about that because I think it's super important to note, especially when we're talking about therapy as a spiritual practice, which implies kind of a choice to enter into this space of contemplation and working with another person in order to kind of better yourself and to understand yourself. So for me, I think one of the biggest gifts that therapy has given me is the ability to love myself and care for myself better through self-understanding. So being able to check in with myself and say, okay, so what is my body telling me right now? Like, what are my triggers? What do I do when I'm triggered? How do I care for myself? And in caring for myself, I've been able to care for others better. There's a quote that I really love, and I don't know who exactly to attribute it to, but it says, if you don't heal what hurt you, you will bleed on people who didn't cut you. And I think that that's a really great way to encapsulate how, by going to therapy, it's an act of service, not just to yourself, but to other people. It allows us to love people better because we are checking in with ourselves and making sure that we're ending damaging patterns and acting from a place of love instead of a place of reaction. And I think that that's super important because as Christians we are called to walk in love as Christ loved us, and we are called to be in community. And we can't do those things properly if we are not coming there from a place of love. And so for me, it's impossible to love well if you're neglecting yourself. And so therapy is taking the space to affirm that you are a child of God and you are worthy of care and you are worthy of taking the time to introspect and to become better, not just for yourself, but for your community. And it's also an act of humility. It's an act of looking beyond yourself and realizing that you can't rely just on your own devices. Like, some problems are bigger than that. Mental health is one of them. And so for me, it's been really beautiful to have to humble myself enough to ask for help. And in doing so, I've been able to connect to a community that is so loving and so much bigger than me. And it's just an affirmation of the Imago Dei, seeing God in the people around us, and cultivating support networks that really manifest the kingdom on earth. I think that therapy is absolutely a spiritual practice, and we can frame it as such. It's a beautiful way to learn to love better and learn to manifest Christ's love better, and to love ourselves and to love our communities as such. So if you're thinking about going to therapy, I strongly encourage it. It's really helped me, and I hope it blesses you too.
To end my talk, I want to talk just a little bit about the practicals of getting therapy. If you are currently a student at the Claremont colleges, you can get free therapy, which is key because therapy can be expensive otherwise. So my thinking is take advantage of that while you can get it for free. You can see someone at Monsoor, or as Sagrika mentioned, at least Scripps has an off-campus referral program that's also free. I'm not sure about the other colleges. Maybe other people know more about that. If you have health insurance through a parent, look into what kind of coverage it offers. If you'd rather see someone off campus and your school doesn't pay for it. Going this route, though, will involve your parent knowing about you going to therapy if your insurance is through them. In terms of finding a therapist, it can take some time. Don't assume that the first person you see will be a good fit for you. See if you feel comfortable with them. Take time to find someone you really vibe with. You can also think beforehand about what you want in a therapist. For me, I've seen 3 different therapists in my life, and I've always wanted them to be Asian American and Christian. The last 2 therapists I saw, I specifically looked for progressive Asian American Christians. And the person I chose that I'm seeing right now has experience working with people in ministry. So very specific, I know. But if you are a person of color, you might really want to see a POC therapist. If you are LGBTQ, you will probably want to find someone who is an ally and has experience with LGBTQ clients. Maybe you have a preference for the gender of your therapist. You can look at what a therapist specializes in too, like eating disorders or ADHD or OCD, for example. If you don't plan on finding a therapist through Monsoor, psychologytoday.com is a good place to look for a therapist. You can do searches with all kinds of filters. I think often there is a big barrier to starting therapy, from finding a therapist to figuring out how to pay for one. But my encouragement is that it's worth it. I personally would be very happy to walk you through the process and support you. I think of therapy as a way to care for ourselves, but also as a gift to those around us and close to us, to our family members, close friends, present or future romantic partners, future children. It is an investment in our own health, which you can be assured of that God cares about wholeheartedly as well. As we move into a time of reflection, we will hear a song provided by our friend Eric Lige. Please feel free to use that time to listen for God's Spirit and how the Spirit might be speaking to you.
We come expectation, open up the heavens. We long to hear from you. We sing our song of passion. Lord, we are waiting, wanting liberty. Take away the chains that bind us. Take away the chains and free us. Take us to a place, Lord, lead us. Hear our plea. This is a cry for freedom for the nations. Humbly we turn to you. This is a cry, it's a cry of passion, liberation. People free, set us free. Set us free. Set us free. Set us free. Sing it out, Rachel, say it.
We come in expectation, open up the heavens, yeah, we long to hear from you. We sing our song of passion, Lord, we are waiting, wanting liberty.
Take away the chains that bind us.
That bind us.
Take away the chains and free us.
Free us.
Take us to a place, the Lord, lead us.
Lead us.
Hear our
plea.
It's a cry of freedom for the nations. We turn to you. This is our, it's a cry of passion, liberation. Set your people free. Set us free. Set us free. Set us free. Set us free. We want to be free. Set us free. Set us free. On the guitar, Edward Chin. Oh yeah. This is our cry. Yes, it is. For the nations, for the nations. Lord, we turn. Lord, we turn to you. This is a cry. It's a cry of passion. Liberation. Set your people free. Set us free. Set us free.
We want to be free.
All we want is liberty.
Set us free.
Freedom, justice, peace. Oh, set us free. The earth needs you. We want to be free. Oh, set us free.
Thank you, Lorraine, for sharing all these great insights. And also thank you to those who offered testimonies about how God has used therapy in your lives. I found this talk really inspiring, and I connected to many of the things that people have mentioned. What really resonated with me was how it's super helpful to view therapy as a way to get to this greater sense of wholeness, and how healing can come through vulnerability, it can come through honesty and trusting and loving oneself. And I think that therapy is an amazing space to be able to cultivate these things with someone who is trained in exactly these things. I also think something that I connected to was how therapy is a great way to put yourself first in a society and in practices where we often don't do that. And I also found the idea that it's really, therapy is a great way to build tools that are needed to live happy and healthy lives. I found that really inspiring as well. I really agree that God changes lives through therapy. And like has been mentioned throughout the talk and through testimonies, if you do have an interest in starting therapy, or you want to find a therapist that is better aligned with your individual needs, please feel free to contact those who offered their support, as well as the resources that were mentioned in the talk. I'd like to encourage us all to take what's resonated with each of us into this next week. And to close, I wanted to thank you all for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you at the Zoom Hangout happening right after this meeting. Thanks, guys.